She's an award-winning writer, a hunting guide, archery and rifle instructor, keynote speaker, and all-around outdoors woman who encourages you to get outside, hunt, fish, shoot, and savor all that life has to offer. And now, here's your host, Mia Anstine.
Well, hey, hi, hello, guys. Thank you for tuning in again. I'm so happy that you're here to listen and learn and share adventures. Today, I have one of my colleagues or cohorts from SCI, and I know we've talked about SCI a lot on the show, but today we're not only going to talk about SCI, we're going to talk about some adventures and how you can also head out and have some fun this summer. But before we get going, as I said, we're talking about SCI, and I talk about SCI a lot because I'm a volunteer for SCI, and really, I have supported SCI for quite a while and joined SCI many years ago because of their advocacy and what they do on a national, state, and also international level to fight for our freedom to hunt. And so it's something that is near and dear to my heart. I grew up in a hunting family. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, there's been a lot of hunters in my life, and I really see the need for conservation in the area. But SCI, it is always at the table for hunters. Whenever you go somewhere, you'll see them there, whether it's at the legislation, whether it's at a local commission. SCI is there, they're commenting, they're listening, they're watching. And so that's why SCI, why I focus on it a lot. And it really overlaps with a lot of what I share with hunting and shooting and stuff like that, which you'll learn a little bit more about how those overlaps happen. But I also wanted to tell you, while we visit today, we will talk about how SCI is at the table, but we also mentioned things that you can do. And one of the things I wanted to remind you, we've talked about women for gun rights and Second Amendment advocacy over the years. But a politician, they really want to hear from their constituents. And something that I do is when I write a letter, I address it from your constituent. And what that is if you live in their district, if you vote or didn't vote for them, even if you didn't vote for them, you are their constituent. So you're in their district, you're somebody that they care about because you obviously can be a future voter, but the decisions they make impact you. And if you don't let them know whether you are for or against something that's going to be addressed, if you don't comment on that, then they assume it's okay with you. So if there is maybe, for instance, a gun issue and you don't comment, they think, oh, okay, this is all right with them. So you've got to comment. And I always say, when you comment, make it personal, make it polite, address it professionally to your representative, your senator, your congressman. Address it professionally. They're not Lauren or Mrs. Boebert, and I'm just saying that because she is our congresswoman right now. But we would address it, Congresswoman Boebert. So you want to be professional about it. They do hold a position, and you should be respectful of that position. But remember, our organizations may comment on the issues, and that's one thing, but when a constituent comments, it weighs pretty heavily. A little more weight to that. I also wanted to let you know, if you want to learn about advocacy, the Safari Times is where you learn about advocacy, and the Safari Magazine is where you might learn about stories and outfitters and adventures. So without further ado, let me not take up too much more of your time, because I have my good friend Chris Tymeson here, and we're going to be talking about not all the boring advocacy stuff, which is exciting for some people like me, and I know some of the listeners like it too, but we're going to talk about some fishing adventures as well. I hope you enjoy today's show.
This summer, whether at the range or in the field, WSI Sports Hypertech Bamboo Tanks, tees, and leggings will have you covered. Visit WSISports.com to support the show and use the affiliate code MACO10 for 10% off your purchase. All products are proudly made in the USA. WSI is bringing back pride in American-made clothing. Again, that code is MACO10 for 10% off your order at WSISports.com.
Hey guys, are you looking for a stylish concealed carry shirt? Check out Tarn Cap Gear. With print reducing patterns, concealed carry snaps, and minimal branding, Tarn Caps cloak of invisibility is what you have been waiting for. Visit mia.limited/tarncap and use the code Anstine for 10% off your purchase. Again, that's mia.limited/tarncap and use code Anstine for 10% off your order.
All right, everybody. Well, I wanted to introduce you to one of my colleagues or cohorts in the SCI industry. We talk about SCI a lot on the podcast. And so, Chris, so that you know, we do have a background. If anyone's listened to past episodes, there's plenty SCI that goes on around Mac Outdoors. But I wanted to introduce you all to Chris with SCI because I actually met Chris. We see each other at the Colorado Capitol, at the DC at the Capitol, and we work on different legislative issues in wildlife and stuff like that. And it wasn't until we were actually meeting with legislators up at the Buckhorn Exchange in Denver. And Chris told me about carrying a fishing rod with him everywhere he goes. And so I was like, wait a second, I got to share this with my listeners. But Chris, would you please introduce yourself to the listeners, let them know who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Chris Tymeson. I am the Western State and Local Liaison for Safari Club. So that means I do state and local issues, government affairs, everything west of the Mississippi is my territory. So it's a pretty big swath of the country. 24 states. I've got a counterpart in the East who's got 26. I joke with him because he doesn't have to go as far as me because the West is so big. But before that, I was the chief attorney for the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks for 22 years before I came to SCI. And then I'm also a veteran, had served in the military and the Army infantry.
Yeah, and it's something that I think a lot of people don't understand is how much work SCI is doing all the time. And I have people say, SCI hasn't worked on maybe the wolf issue in Colorado. That's the most recent thing where I try not to get in the arguments in the comments on social media, but on Facebook, I was like, wait a second, like don't go there, because I know me personally as a volunteer, as a regional rep, I worked really hard on that, on focus groups and all kinds of different issues with it. And, we had to do what the voters asked, and we tried to have a say in that. And I work on other things too. But for you, with your great big territory, what kind of different issues have you been working on, like in the past year, that maybe people didn't realize SCI is in the middle of?
Well, I find myself increasingly engaged in carnivores and predators, right? Mountain lions, grizzly bears, black bears, wolves, bobcats. It seems like I'm drawn into those. And I feel like many times SCI is the only organization commenting on some of those regs, And my background, I came from the agency, and so I understand that reg process and I follow it closely, probably more so than the legislative process, just because that's where the meat of the language comes from. The real details come in those. And so I also want to be, if I know that people who are opposed to what we stand for are commenting on regs, I want to be there, even if I know it's going to pass at the commission level, to make sure that SCI is out there saying, hey, we're here to support you. And so that's what I do. I draft comment letters, go meet with legislators. We also have an alert system where we've got 80,000 plus advocates, and we send out alerts to folks to ask them to comment if it becomes a big issue. Recently, well, this morning, I'm working on Nebraska mountain lions. I'm also doing a presentation for a lunch and learn in Washington, D.C. I head to D.C. on Wednesday of this week. I give a lunch and learn on Thursday to Hill staffers, so help educate them on hunting 101 and state primacy and how hunting's funded. And then, let's see, last week I was in Washington State for 4 days with the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. I'll probably comment on East Slope mountain lions in Colorado this week. So those are the things that I do.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I notice. I'm on the Sportsman's Roundtable or Sportsperson's Roundtable here in Colorado. And it seems like some of the sportsmen that are not involved, they don't see like everything that we're doing in the background and how we are trying to fight for what we can. And, sometimes we have to work with what we've got. And if it's something like the wolf issue where voters voted, it's like, well, we can't stop that once the election happened, but we can try to make things as good as we can. And what do you think an average sportsman, what should they be doing, or how can they pay attention? Or, I mean, you mentioned the outreach where you can ask people to comment. What should we be doing? I mean, I know what I do, but an average sportsman, what should they be doing?
Well, I think, just as a commentary, generally, sportsmen and women are happy, right? So therefore, because game populations are probably at all-time highs, and with that success comes some failure too, because people I think don't pay attention as much because you know white-tailed deer, for example. I'm in Kansas, right? And white-tailed deer, our first modern deer season was 1965. You can shoot 6 deer a year, 6 antlerless deer, and 1 antlered deer. I mean, if you could fill all those tags, most people don't. But when game populations are at that level, people don't come to the commission meetings. They aren't really engaged as much, right? So what can you do? You can meet with legislators, because oftentimes I was the only person in the Capitol. You can and talking about wildlife issues. So I would be there testifying against bad proposals. Nobody else was there except for the people who wanted to change things. Um, and I realize that's hard during the legislative session because people can't take off work and come in the middle of the day or whatever, or it's a long ways to the Capitol. Um, so you could follow on, like, I put out when I was at the state agency, you can follow the state agency's legislative update every week. You can write emails, you can make phone calls. I think phone calls are the most effective way to contact legislators and commissioners. It's an interpersonal conversation, and it's not just a nondescript email. And I think the worst thing you can do is to infight with other hunters. I see it, and I've seen it a long time. They don't hunt the way I hunt. They don't use the same method that I hunt. But I work across the West, and my busy states are Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado, New Mexico, where the antis are really active. And I don't have that problem in Kansas where I worked before, but you can see they're gaining ground in places like on the commission in Washington state. And to argue with other hunters instead of pushing back against the anti-hunting proposals is a no-win situation for us.
That's a lot of energy to be putting out there when you're fighting your own, basically.
Right.
And
Right.
as you said, I mean, the method, I understand people having preferred methods, but also why are we wasting our energy fighting on somebody who's a rifle hunter versus a bow hunter, for example? Why are we fighting them when they're not competing with you for tags? So,
So,
stuff like that.
right. I think about the people who don't like what we do. They enjoy the fact that we're fighting amongst ourselves because it takes our energy, right? The antis, there are lots of anti-groups, and they are cohesive in their effort. They might have different methodologies and different leadership of organizations, but ultimately they're all cohesive around, I want to stop hunting. And so bit by bit by bit, if we argue that longbow hunters shouldn't have the opportunity to hunt in the same time that I do as a crossbow hunter or a traditional bow hunter with a recurve or something like that, the idea that we're arguing amongst ourselves, they're still going to pick us off because they're going to pick off that one thing, then they're going to the next thing, and they're cohesive. And it takes us all to push back on stuff like that, not just a few of us.
And so some of the issues that I'm seeing, I was curious what your thoughts are as far as, I mean, right now, In New Mexico last year, they limited non-resident hunters, and right in Colorado, they're talking about limiting non-resident hunters. I think in Wyoming and a few other states, they've done that. Like, and I mean, they've always been limited, but they're further reducing their opportunities as a non-resident. How do you think that is affecting hunting opportunities in the future, or how's it affecting agencies?
Okay, so if you look at non-resident allocations, right, used to be like depending on the location, some states it's wide open, right? And you have like Missouri's, I live a mile from Missouri, so Missouri is over the counter non-resident deer and turkey. And I think that they have about 3 or 4% of their total permit allocation. The way it happens is it goes to non-residents just with no limitation, no cap. In Kansas, we have a cap and it's based upon a figure. It's not just like, it's an allocation with a whole formula in it. And then you look at, let's say, Wyoming, where it's 20% or whatever the cap number is. So I was part of litigation back in the early 2000s where an outfitter had sued New Mexico and Arizona, and then sued Nevada and Kansas, and then there was some litigation between Minnesota and North Dakota on non-resident allocations. And ultimately, we were successful. We prevailed because we went to Congress and we said, we want you to pass something as part of this budget bill for Iraq, which allowed states to then limit non-residents under the Commerce Clause. So while we were successful, there was an immediate reaction. Like Arizona then only had a cap on elk and a cap on kaibab deer. And then they went to a 10% cap across the board. So non-residents got hamstrung in those cases. And I'm not saying residents or non-residents should have equal access. I'm not advocating for that. But I think that when you start to discriminate against non-residents, it's my brother who lives in Arkansas or my brother in Minnesota, when they want to come here, we're not just talking about random people that we don't know. We're talking about family and friends, right? Or in the case of, why should we limit somebody who wants to come to Cheyenne Bottoms and hunt ducks? That's their lifelong dream, and they're from Pennsylvania, and they have to use a guide, and guides get a bad connotation, but they provide a valuable service for somebody who can't get there themselves or can't have the gear. It's just their dream. They want to spend a couple days and do this. So I think that when you see those caps and the reactions, now you're talking about limiting people more, and get waffle. That was a common topic. We need to limit people because other people are limiting people, and it's a reaction. So then everybody starts limiting you more and more. And you have to remember, you're a non-resident in 49 other states.
Right. And you brought up something that, I mean, a few things that I hadn't thought of. And that's how I think almost all of us are, is like we think in our own little bubble of like what we do, where we go and stuff like that. And I think a lot of people think of that resident, non-resident issue as an outfitter issue, and that, you know, the outfitters just want the money from the non-residents. But you're right. I do have a lot of family and friends that come and hunt here in the state. And now I actually have more of them than anybody who's wanting to like pay for a hunt or something. But then you also brought up like waterfowl, and I travel all over the place for waterfowl. So that, and upland birds too, and fishing, which I see your fishing shirt. But so there's a lot to it. And I think that's something that I try to do, and I think I do a pretty good job normally of being empathetic to other users, whether it's archery or rifle or shotgun upland people. But there's more to the scope a lot of times than what we think on the surface, or the one original issue. So thank you for bringing that up, because it just, it broadens my scope, and hopefully it broadens the listener's scope as well.
One last point about that. Non-residents in Kansas provide about 70% of the Fish and Wildlife Agency budget. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about limiting non-residents as a resident, you have to ask yourself, are you willing to pay more? Because you either have to pay more or services are going to have to be reduced. And, Kansas, for example, we provide, 1.5 million, 1.2 million acres of public access on private property that's paid for through sportsmen's dollars. And so if, the response is, okay, if you can't, that's just one item in a big budget. But if you can't, if their money's not there from non-residents and residents aren't willing to pay, then you're going to have to cut that service. And that's a valuable service. That access in Kansas is a 97% privately owned state. So access is key.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, you have to
Access.
weigh all those things as an
Yeah.
administrator. And it's easy for somebody to say, let's cut non-residents. But when you actually get down to it, can you? I don't know the answer, or at what level can you sustain?
Right. And that's another huge point, which I've brought up several times in conversation, is also the tourism dollars. Because I know here,
Right.
I live in Southwest Colorado and we're tourist towns, which, I mean, we've got river rafting and fishing and hiking and mountain biking and a lot of different things. But also in those fall months, a lot of the little mom and pop shop owners, they rely on the tourists. And so that's something I haven't seen a lot of studies about, how that will impact those small towns. But it definitely will. And I don't know that a resident hunter is going to make up for that, because they're already there, spending their money day after day. So I think that's another aspect. And you talked about like limiting access, which here in the eastern half of Colorado, especially in the Northeast, our agency works on corners for conservation, the corners of the pivots where you can go and hunt pheasants and upland birds. And so I see that as that might be something where there's not enough money to partner with those landowners. And that's definitely something over there, like you said, where it's a lot of private land, there's going to be some limited access. But I also thought when you said that is when you limit the agency, that may also limit us in some of our studies that we're doing if we don't have funding for those studies for the
Right.
biology aspect. So yeah, so much to it. There's so much.
Right.
I always enjoy talking about legislative stuff, which some people think I'm crazy. And I guess I would say I enjoy it because if we don't talk about it, if we don't look at it, then we're going to lose it. And I recently went to Pennsylvania and talked to their agency, and my whole speech was about how quickly things can be gone and that we have to pay attention and we have to act. And for me, that talk was more on an R3, on a recruitment aspect. And I talked to them about some of the SCI foundations. We recently did waterfowl hunts in New Mexico, and we did a quail hunt in New Mexico. But we also have here in Colorado, the Four Corners chapter, they have a Sables group, and we're doing a fly fishing trip with new fly fishing women who want to learn to fly fish, or a couple of them just want to learn about gear and how to read water and, how to get into fishing. So that's coming up. But I really wanted to talk to you about you said you carry a rod almost everywhere you go. And that really caught my attention because I've carried fly rods to New Zealand, and it was kind of a hassle with our fly rods, which now I have a smaller breakdown rod. But will you tell us about this adventure, or is it a self-imposed challenge? Will you tell us about it?
Sure. It started mostly during COVID. I used to fish a lot, but not like I do now. And during COVID, you couldn't go anywhere and you couldn't do anything. And so I started seeking out more opportunities for my kids and myself and my wife to go around the Kansas City area where we're at. And I really ramped up the number of days, and I tried to do little challenges like, can I fish every day for a month, to see if I could do that. And then I would be like, I wonder if I could hit 100 days of fishing this year. And then when I hit 100 that year, my wife was like, I bet you can't hit 200. And so I started just ramping it up. Well, and then because I travel for SCI, I probably travel, I would say 100 to 120 days a year for SCI. And so I wanted to fish and also to see new places and just to do new things. And so I bought a St. Croix travel rod, a couple of them. One is an ultralight, and I'm an ultralight fisherman, primarily spinning rod. So I use a Fluger President 20X, 2 pound test, 64th ounce jigs, and I usually catch crappie, bass, bluegill, green sunfish, red ears, catfish. Those are my fish species that I'm pretty average on. And so I have every day, like where my kids have soccer, I drop off. I know there's a pond where I can go fish close by. I fish almost exclusively public. And so it's a lake that belongs to the city. You just have to have a Kansas fishing license. So I'll fish there for an hour, come back and pick up a child from sports. And so whatever, if it's volleyball, I know there's one over near the volleyball court where we practice, and the soccer fields. And so I've got a little circuit that I kind of run with in town. And then when I'm on the road, I have that, I fish with the same rod every day that I also have a travel rod companion. So I fish with the St. Croix rod that's 4 foot. I have a travel rod, a 4-piece travel rod. And then I've got a medium light one too that I took like to Alaska and I fished up there. So last year, I fished 17 different states and 2 countries. So that was a pretty good year. And I had 261 days of fishing. I couldn't make every day, but I mean, that's over 2/3 of the year.
That's crazy. And I just think it's insane because here, like I live close to a lake, I live close to rivers, and I do not get out that often to go fishing. It's like, that's why I think I was so amazed, because like when we're planning our vacations, if I'm going to Mexico, I'm either going to find a place to fish or hunt, like wherever I'm going, like, okay, we're going to do this. And so with your job and the amount of travel you have to do, I was just so impressed that you're taking that time. And when you decided to do this, did you just do it because you have a passion for fishing, or is there an ulterior motive? I mean, was it kind of I'm thinking for me, that would be like my downtime and my stress reducer, because I imagine your job is very stressful.
It can be stressful for sure. It's my Zen time. It is, like, even if I get 5 or 10 minutes in a day. And then another thing that started during the pandemic, a friend of mine lost his job. And so the first fish I catch every day, I take a picture of and I send it to him. And so it started then just kind of to cheer him up. And then my brother was like, hey, I want a picture. And then my other brother, hey, I want a picture, right? And so now I have a group of people that I send pictures to every day, and some of them are lumped together, but most of the texts go out individual. So I send out 20 a day now, and so that's kind of a little thing that I do. And I used to post on Facebook every day, and I think I maybe wore people out. And my hashtag was "Fishing's always a great way to end the day," and I would take that first picture and I would post that every day. So now I'm a little more judicious in when I post it, if it's like if I catch 5 species in one night or something like that. But yeah, I did it for Zen time, and then like you can almost always. Now, New Mexico was harder for me when I was there, but I can always, and so I did fish New Mexico last year, but you can almost always find a public pond or something that you can go and fish in. And then, you're buying a day license or a couple days license, helping conservation. That money goes to help fund. And so, and I'm almost exclusively catch and release, except for crappie in the spring. I like to eat crappie. And so the kids and I will catch a mess of crappie, and I have a little assembly line, and we'll clean fish, and then we freeze them and eat them the rest of the year. But mostly, mostly it's catch and release. During the pandemic, the boys wanted to keep catfish, and I didn't really know much about. I had never really been a catfisherman. I mean, I've caught them, but not enough to eat. And so I read, YouTube's great, learned how to clean a catfish, and then so that was at first. I think that year I caught 302 catfish. because they wanted to focus on catfish. So I bought catfish rods, and they all came out of one little lake. It probably has more pounds of catfish in it per square acre than, or per acre, than any place else in the state. It's incredible. And so then they wanted to eat them, and so we cleaned them and we ate them. But then the carcasses, I live in the city, so then they were like, I had to make a rule that we could only keep fish on Sunday or Monday night because Tuesday night was trash night. Tuesday
Oh,
morning
yeah.
was trash day, right? Because I just can't dispose of the carcass any old place. So then it got to the point where I was like, oh, I forgot the bucket today, so I wouldn't have to clean fish and keep the carcasses. So, but the kids still had a great time, and we caught lots of fish. I went back the
That's
other day. I went back the other, and I average about, usually I'm like I usually catch 1,000 fish by the 1st of June. I'm a little less than that this year. And I went back because I was curious the last 5 years, 4.5 years. I said, how many days have I fished? Over 1,000. It was like 1,043. And then how many fish I've caught, and it's almost 10,000 over the last 4.5 years. I keep a detailed log of where I fish, who I fish with, what we catch every day. So that way,
and
so I know those numbers.
okay, because that's what I was just going to ask you. What inspired the log, just for your own personal
I used to
benefit
just keep it for
record?
hunting, and then I go back occasionally and I look at it and I'm like, oh yeah, I went to Alaska and did that. Or I caught I try to get big little fish. Like a 10-inch bluegill is like the thing I seek most. They're like an 80-pound tuna on that small rod and 2-pound test. And they're so fun to fight, and they're aggressive. They're just a great little fish. And so I like to look and see if I've caught new species. And like when I was in Texas one time, I met with the director, the new director, and afterwards I talked to him about fishing a little bit, and he told me about this state park. So before I flew out that night, I went the state park's on the way to the airport. So I went to the state park right in the middle of the city and caught a red-breasted sunfish that I had never caught before. So stuff like that, just to keep a log and go back and look at it.
And so in your log, are you using like a Hunter's Hill journal, or do you just have a little journal book or a little spiral
Just a
notebook, or
Word
how are you?
document.
Oh, a Word document. So
Yeah,
you have
just
it,
keep
you
a
can
Word.
take it anywhere without having to worry about a book.
Yeah, I put it on a flash drive,
Nice.
right? So I can take it wherever I go.
And in your document, you're documenting obviously the place and fish, and then are you documenting a story and putting a picture, or what kind of details?
No, it's pretty bare bones. It's just where I fish, what day, the day, where, who, and what.
And what? And you don't put what you caught it on?
I almost fish exclusively the same thing. I fish
Oh, okay.
64th ounce mule jig. It's a Kansas company. Um, the man who started it, Ethan, uh, he was on the K-State Bass Club. And so he has it's like a little solid body with a flicker tail on it. It's called the Donkey Tail Junior. And he's got different various sizes. Mulefishing.com, I think is what it is. You can just do mule fishing, and uh, he's got a great product. And it's like 99% lead free, so I think if people make voluntary choices about conservation, uh, some of those things come into consideration, right?
Right. And that's a very good point, because that's something that we also deal with legislatively, is this
Right.
lead issue, which I'm sure you even know more about that than most of my listeners or myself. And we had Connie Brooks from Barnes Bullets on to talk a little bit about it, the lead issue. But you were talking about that you use primarily the same setup, but you did mention you got a different rod and stuff for catfish. What would determine, why would I need a different setup?
So the catfisher pull a little harder. They're a little bit bigger. And honestly, it's kind of overkill. I have some 10-foot rods with 20-pound test on there. So the line is thicker, but those catfish can certainly give a good tug and sometimes break off even. So, and for my kids, it's a lot easier to horse in a big fish with a big rod.
Mm-hmm.
On my little rod, the biggest fish I've landed on my little rod is a 6-pound catfish on 2-pound test. It's a good fight. I had a really nice bass on yesterday. I saw it in this newly renovated lake that I fish, has made the water super clear. And so it's like sight fishing. And I saw this big bass come in, take me, and before I could adjust my drag, he just went bam, broke it right off. So you gotta have for those big cats, you're gonna take a heftier rod and a thicker line.
So what kind of, are you using a jig with them? What are you using for your hooks?
Oh, the cats.
Yeah.
There's a commercial bait that I buy at Walmart, and it kind of looks like a dog, like a piece of dog food, but it's soft, right? That's kind of what it looks like. And then you just hook it on the hook. And I use I think I'm using number 4 hooks. I can't remember. So smaller hooks, cast out with some weight and get it out there and just let it sit on the bottom. And then I put it in a rod holder. And then when there's a big fish on there. So it's not my preferred method. I prefer to move. So I have a little Osprey pack, shoulder day pack or whatever that flips over my one shoulder. I keep a bunch of rubber, those donkey tail junior bodies, and I have a box of jig heads. And then on the side, I've got I got clippers and a set of pliers, and I just keep moving constantly. That's what I carry every day.
Okay. And when you're traveling for work, are you generally you're taking carry-on, and can you take that gear in your carry-on?
You can. I don't. Typically, okay. I check a bag because I fly on Southwest mostly, and so bags fly free. So then you can just throw that in and into your bag, and it's small enough that it'll fit in a carry-on size bag. The rod, and if I put it crossways, it'll fit in my carry-on. I've never had a problem with it flying in my luggage. I just put the rod right up next to the inside of the luggage seam on the, where the middle is, where it folds. And so, yeah, and then I just throw the same day pack that I carry around everywhere. I just take instead and throw that into my carry-on or right. And I don't think hooks are not forbidden. I've never had a problem going through security with hooks, but I also don't have anything else in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking when you had said forceps, and I know those probably wouldn't be a problem, but I was just wondering, like, what other fishing gear do I have in our tackle box that I think everything would probably pass on carry-on? I don't know.
Right.
When you said in New Mexico, you kind of had a little bit more of a challenge finding a place to fish. Is the river there that goes through the city, most of that's private property, or do they don't have public access on that river?
Well, I was looking for trout mostly. I was trying to catch trout, and so not on the river through Albuquerque or Santa Fe. I was in Santa Fe.
Yeah, and
I fished both Albuquerque and Santa Fe, but I went a little bit east to the I can't think of the name of the river right now.
That's why I was looking a little confused too. I know that river, but I can't think of the name.
Right. I went east, and there's public access. It's just, when you go to a more arid place like Texas or Arizona or New Mexico, it gets just a little harder. Or Southwest. I was in California one time to give an award, and I had to drive I had to take an Uber about 30 minutes to go to a lake to go find a body of water that I could fish. I mean, the ocean was right there. It was in San Diego, but I wanted to go up into the foothills a little bit off the ocean, and so I just Ubered my way up there and fished for a while and caught some nice bass, and then Ubered back down to my hotel.
And so this is what caught my attention when you talked about carrying your rod with you is, I may have told this story on the podcast before, but I tell a lot of people, what got me into advocating for hunting and fishing and firearms was my parents divorced and we moved to San Diego. And when I got there in the high school, most of the kids didn't fish. They didn't know about fishing. They hadn't been fishing. And I'm like, Lake Cuyamaca is right there, and like all these different lakes are there and they have fish in them, and then also fishing off the piers, you can go hang out and sit there, which to me, that kind of fishing is a little bit boring. There are opportunities, and a lot of people didn't realize that those opportunities are there. And that's why when you said you go places, I'm like, well, how are you learning about the places? Because to me, I see that as, even with the outdoor partnership that I'm on, a lot of people talk about people in the Denver area not having opportunities to go fishing. But I'm like, there's stuff right there in the city. So what do you suggest for people who are saying that they don't know where to go? What can they do?
I would go to the Game and Fish website, right? The Game and Fish agency in your state. They have typically will put together public access opportunities in a book or on their website that you could download and put it on your GPS. And then like the walk-in hunting access we talked about earlier, there's walk-in fishing in Kansas. And so they put that out there, and I think Garmin probably puts it out on their stuff. If people still use a Garmin like that or Onyx, you can find it through that. So that's the first place I would go. The second place is, besides their website, I would go just to the internet and just type in fishing Indianapolis or wherever you're going to go, fishing Minneapolis or Kansas City, and just see what pops up. You might be really surprised. And that's how I've done it. Just kind of learned as I went and tried to find a place that I would be close by wherever I'm staying that's reasonable that I can get to.
Yeah, and that's the greatest thing, I think, is that there's so much information out there. We just have to look for it. But there are also, you mentioned like a Garmin or Onyx or something like that. They're evolving as well. I didn't realize how much information now is on, at least Onyx. I have Onyx on my phone, and there's even like wetlands for duck hunting or upland areas where you can go pheasant hunting, that they kind of have these layers on the map,
right,
that you can add. I'm sure you probably have to have premium subscription or something to see all the layers, but it's really neat that we have this stuff now, where way back when I was in high school, we didn't have that.
even asking other fishermen, right? I think generally people want to share, and they don't mind sharing, maybe not their special location, but like one day during the pandemic, I was walking along and I was like, I want to go fish this place. And I looked down and there's a guy standing in the exact same spot that I wanted to fish. I was like, what is this craziness? This guy is in my spot. And so I go down and I just kind of sidle up next to him. There's a whole lake, there's nobody else fishing, but he's in the corner of the lake that I wanted to fish. And so I just kind of go down there and set up, and we just start talking. And it turns out now he and I fish probably 3 or 4 times a week together. He taught me how to build fishing rods. I started building fishing rods during the pandemic. And then he turned me on to a bunch of spots, and I turned him onto a bunch of spots too. And just make a friend and start talking to him. Go to a body of water and just be friendly and see what people will do. That's a great resource.
Absolutely. And that's something I've suggested for people who want to start hunting, is to reach out. If you know someone's a hunter, ask them if you can tag along. If you want to figure out how to fish, ask a fisherman if you can tag along. And I mentioned earlier the sables and the SCI chapters. I think everybody thinks of SCI as hunting, but you mentioned like lead, and we deal with fishing issues with lead, and it's not only with big game and hunting, or the waterfowl, which has been federally a rule for a while. But we also deal with some issues that deal with angling. And I know each SCI chapter works differently. They all work in their communities where they see a need. But this one down here, as I said, the sables, the women, they're going to teach some fly fishing clinics and how to tie knots, how to read water, and different stuff like that. But if you reach out to your SCI chapter, ask them about it. And if they don't have anything, then look at some of the bass anglers, and you can ask them if they have anything where they can teach you. For fly fishing, go to Trout Unlimited, ask them, and they have stuff all the time where they'll teach you as well. So I think there's plenty of resources where
Right.
hopefully if you think you're limited, then reach out to us and we'll help give you some ideas depending where you're at. Because Chris is fishing all over the place while he's working and, taking that as his break and his downtime when he's away from his family. And I just thought that was amazing. I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, as I said, it's my Zen time. So even if it's 10 minutes just to go out and catch a fish, and uh, it helps me clear my mind. Let's put it that way.
So what are some other, obviously you work with SCI and that's why I had you on here is for SCI, but what are some other things with fishing? I mentioned lead, but is there anything else that we do specifically with fishing that you can think of?
No, there's a lot of overlap on the lead issue for fishing and hunting. There are proposals to ban lead on federal refuges, right? And it's not just focused on hunting. I think that's problematic. Like, the jigs that I use, he wants to be a better steward of the environment if he can, right? And so he makes a voluntary choice as to what he's going to put out for a product, and everybody makes a voluntary choice whether they're going to use it or not. But it's not 100% lead free, and I don't know that there's product out there in the fishing world that's 100% lead free. And so when somebody says, "Hey, we're going to ban lead use," they're taking away the voluntariness, which I think that's the key consideration. People will make choices based upon price and based upon their moral compass or whatever the reason is that they're making their choice. We shouldn't take away that opportunity to make a choice, right?
Mm.
But then when you come back and you say you can only use lead free, I don't know that there's product out there. I haven't looked for product because how I fish and what I fish with, but lead sinkers are a staple in some places for catfishing or whatever the methodology where you have to get to the bottom quicker. So, or stay on the bottom. And so I don't know what replacement that is. And is it tolerable financially? I just don't know the answer to those things. But I do know that taking away people's choice is not the right method.
Right. And that's I wanted to talk to you about your fishing adventures because of the access issue. And that's something that I see as a limit to people who want to have access to fishing or hunting, is like you said, limiting that choice is limiting their accessibility to this activity. And so it's something I agree with you. I think we should have our choices and we can, make our moral or ethical decisions onto what we want to do. But there's another issue that I'm curious, and SCI has commented on it before, but fur bans. And there's you talked about the predator issues and stuff like that, but the fur bans, I fly fish a lot. I grew up with lures and baits and stuff like that. And then in the past decade or 2 decades, I fly fish a ton. And so this fur ban is something that impacts us as well.
Right. Certainly the fur ban, again, people limiting choice based upon not science, but based upon emotion. And, IP91 is going on right now in Colorado, right? And that's something SCI is working on collectively with a number of conservation organizations, also based on emotion only. I watched Dan Gates put something out yesterday or over the weekend I was watching, and it was, a comment from somebody who is pushing for the ban on hunting and trapping of mountain lions, bobcats, and lynx. That's a red herring. You can't do those things anyway with a lynx. But they put out information like, well, mountain lions aren't endangered now, but they will be soon in the future. That was an exact quote. And it's just a lie. It's a lie, and trying to play on the emotions. There is no science base to it. Same with the proposed fur ban. No science at all. Like fur bearer populations are probably stronger than ever. When you look at uh, raccoons and possums, and the number of people who trap actually is going down. It's quite down actually compared to what it was 20 or 30 or 50 years ago. So to say that, you know, fur bearers are imperiled, that's just not true. Even river otters have made a tremendous comeback, for example. Like
Yes.
it's super successful program to bring back river otters. So to say that fur bearers are imperiled at all,
It's very challenging, I think, to deal with the emotion because we all have our emotions, and I also feel like some people, I mentioned earlier, even sportsmen, like we don't follow everything. And so a lot of these people, all they're seeing is the propaganda about why we shouldn't use fur, why we shouldn't have fur. And they're not considering what the replacement for fur might be. And then I've had a few people that were shocked, our cowboy hats. I wear cowboy hats all the time when you see me at convention and stuff like that. I'm always wearing my cowboy hat. But the fur, it goes into more things. And then for me personally, I have fur blankets that I've had since I was a kid. Whereas I bought, this $20 throw on Amazon to put on the couch because it looked really cool. And I'm like, 6 months later, it's a tattered mess and I have to throw it away. And I'm like, well, there's that cost prohibitive stuff where it's like, well, that cost me only $20 or however much, but really if I want to replace it, it's going to cost me more than the fur. So I don't know how to always deal with their emotions. I mean, for me, the best thing has been, a one-on-one conversation with somebody who's receptive, but there's a lot more than just one person to talk to. So it's a
I think,
job.
If you live in Colorado right now and you're a hunter, you should be concerned about IP91, and you should be going out and talking to every person who's not a hunter about this issue, because they're the ones who are going to be the vote in the middle. That's the most important vote. And so you should go out and talk to them intelligently and say, or on the fur ban, for example, and say, hunting is scientifically based. It's not emotion based. And there is no way. I think state game agencies have great credibility. I think they have good credibility with the general public, right? So if you're a hunter and you say, I think that the state agency, there's no way they would ever allow a species to become endangered. It's not in their business to do that, right? It's not what they want to do. So why would somebody say that? Well, because they're lying. They're not telling the truth. That's how, and you should be out just talking to people. Like that's probably maybe one of the best things you could do to be engaged as a sportsman right now in Colorado is go out and talk to folks.
Right. And I'll add to that, Chris, is one thing for you all, if you're listening and you're going to go talk to people, always keep it positive. And if there's pushback, touch and feel, see what they're receptive to, but don't fight with them if they're not receptive to hearing the information, or if most people who are not hunters don't understand quotas, and they don't understand how we hunt lions, why we use dogs, why, the methods. So it's all about finding a way to explain that to them. But if you push too hard, it's kind of like there's a game that we did in a leadership where you put, your hand and you're like, okay, you press against my hand. And the harder I press, the harder you push back. And because it's our instinct. And so if we're trying to explain this to somebody who is pushing back, the harder you're pushing, the harder they're going to push back. They're not going to be receptive to what you're trying to explain. So that's a method and a tactic that if you want to learn more about, I can teach you about that, because there's definitely a technique to being empathetic to what they're open to learning.
Also, don't take any base level of knowledge for granted. My wife and I went to Africa in April. And so when we came back, we had a great hunt, and it was her hunt. She had bought it several years ago, and we finally got around to doing it. And then I added a couple animals to hunt myself, and then we did some touring. But we got back in soccer game, and one of the my daughter's team, one of the moms of another child on the team, asked me why I wasn't at the tournament, and so I told her we had been in Africa, and her response was, you didn't shoot any endangered animals, did you? And I said, no, actually, that's antithetical to what I stand for, right? And she's like, well, I just assumed that animals in Africa are imperiled and endangered. And I was like, that's absolutely not the case. So even her, and she wasn't anti-hunting, she just didn't understand. She had a perspective that was not where I come from at all, right? And so I chatted with her a few minutes about, why hunters matter and who pays for species and why species have been restored if they had been imperiled at some point. And, we had a conversation about having to live next to an elephant, which is a completely foreign concept to people, and why that elephant has value if they allow hunters to come and hunt. And so it was a good conversation, but I was taken aback at how misinformed her position started from. And then after our conversation, she's like, I had no idea, right? It was enlightened. So that was good.
Yeah, and that's just that one, like I said, the one-on-one conversation where if you're talking to one and I'm talking to one, that's only two. So if the listeners could also go out there and have those conversations, we could make a really big difference. That would be a wonderful thing where we're not just perceived as, the murderous lion killers or something like that. And I actually had to scroll past a comment about and I'm sure it was from somebody who wasn't a hunter, and how nobody kills a mountain lion and eats it. And here, like for us, if we shoot a mountain lion, you're like, okay, I can only give you this tiny bit and you this tiny bit, because everybody wants some of the meat because they love it. And so there are those misconceptions where, and online, it's very difficult to have those conversations. And I have had a few that are just amazing, but that doesn't always happen. So pick and choose those ones.
Right. People can hide behind a screen, right? And you don't have to face somebody. It's always more difficult to talk to somebody in person and have a conversation like that, right? It's somebody who's, when I say difficult for them to, say nasty things to your face. People don't want to do that, right? But when they sit behind a computer, they can spout it off all they want, all the misinformation they want. They can be rude and disrespectful. And so get out and talk to people. Try to, spread the word about the initiative petition and everything like that. But I was going to ask also, isn't it required to keep the meat in Colorado on a mountain lion? Like,
yep.
And people don't understand that either, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They say nobody eats mountain lion, and that's just not true.
It's 100% not true. And I actually have recipes on my website if anybody wants to go look at them. I have a few different versions. Actually, I have a bobcat recipe as well. Bobcat is really good. And I actually did that one as a challenge. I was like, okay, sure. And it's actually very good. So we can eat lots of animals. I have a friend who's, and really meat eater is eating everything, but I have a friend here locally who's eaten pretty much everything as well. So
right. My wife and I bear hunted a couple years ago, and of course we brought back our bears, and I made burgers and put them up against elk burgers, and people in my neighborhood probably wouldn't know the difference, right? Generally, of what an elk is or a deer. I mean, they know the meat. So, but I put elk and I put bear out, and people couldn't tell the difference. They're like, "This is great. All of it's great." They loved it all.
That's awesome. So
that's another way also
it's so fun
to
open those conversations.
Right? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We had a wild game feed. We try to do that every now and then with our neighbors and bring them over, and most of them come and ask for more.
Exactly. That's what I mean by if
right?
we have a mountain lion down and somebody hears about it, everybody wants some meat. One of our really good cohorts in some of the sportsman stuff that we're working on drew his moose tag this year, and I told him, I was like, be forewarned that is a huge animal. But when Hank got his moose, all of a sudden it was like we went to get steaks and we had no more moose because everybody, wanted, they all loved it, and we're like, sure, sure, and we don't mind sharing, at all,
Right.
but it's fun to share wild game. Yeah. And so you mentioned Initiative 91 here in
Mhm.
Colorado. I know we've worked really hard at doing some fundraising for that. Could you let the listeners know what they can do or where they can support the mission to fight that initiative here in Colorado?
Sure. There are two entities that are set up to collect funds for that. It doesn't matter if it's $10 or $100,000. There's an issues committee, and it's Save the Hunt Colorado or Colorado's Wildlife Deserves Better. Either of
Both of
those,
those.
yeah, either of those two you can donate to. SCI has raised some significant funds through our chapters in Colorado to help fight against that. There are videos online that you could share on your social media feeds if you're out there, that are well done, 30-second videos. Either go to Coloradans for Responsible Wildlife Management or Colorado's Wildlife Deserves Better. Pull those videos down and share those on your social media. That's an effective way to help spread the word.
It absolutely is. Well, Chris, thank you for joining me today on the podcast and sharing some of your fishing stories and tips. Hopefully, it'll help inspire some other people to get out there. Or for like me, it inspires me to kind of broaden my horizons of where I'm going fishing rather than just here when I have a break. So
Right?
I appreciate it.
Sure. Happy to do so. Encourage people to also come to the SCI convention if they get a chance. If you've never been to the SCI annual convention, it's in Nashville. It's on the back of it's on my screensaver or background, I should say, January 22nd to 25th. I'm there the whole week. It's an incredible time. You'll see some incredible taxidermy. There's plenty of fishing outfitters and hunting outfitters there, a whole mix of stuff. And if you get an opportunity, even to swing down for a day, it's totally worth it.
Absolutely. I enjoy it. And I've been year after year after year, and it's always fun every time. Part of it is seeing those outfitters, whether you're going on a fishing trip or hunting or whatever, but also some of the artists. We have a bronze artist that is now a personal friend, and there's just such good people at that convention. It's a good time.
Right. And if
Yeah.
it's clearly geared towards hunting, but there is some fishing there. So, and big game fishing. I'm just trying to think. I know there's some outfits in Panama and some stuff like that. So, yeah, absolutely come to the show.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I sure appreciate you sharing some of your time.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Mia.
Hey, this is Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, host of the Armed Lutheran Radio podcast, reminding you that the podcast you're listening to is a proud member of the Self Defense Radio Network. Check out all the great content at selfdefenseradio.net.